Niska moves that the rules of the House be so far suspended so that House File Number 3819 be recalled from the Committee on Children and Families, Finance and Policy, be given its second and third readings, and be placed upon its final passage.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Niska, to your motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. This week we were reminded again about the multi-billion-dollar fraud scandal racking our state when 22 child care facilities were raided, and it's important that we as the governor said from this rostrum, send him bills that he can sign to fix fraud. House File 3819 is urgently needed in order to fix the fraud in the CCAP program, and I will defer to Representative West to further discuss the bill. But first, Madam Speaker, I request a roll call.
Roll call has been requested. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So we all know childcare is outrageously expensive. Trust me, I know. I pay around $900 a week for my 2 kids. It costs around $20,000 a year for the average infant in a center. It costs taxpayers around $500 million a year in the CCAP program. And despite all this money, providers still close, there's no access, and it's ridiculously expensive. Why? Well, there are a lot of reasons, but one thing that's been made abundantly clear is that fraud is an epidemic in our assistance programs in Minnesota, and CCAP is among them, to the tune of maybe $100 million from what we have heard. Minnesota's become a fraud tourist destination. Literally, people come here because our programs are so generous. We just had 20 centers-ish raided by the FBI investigating fraud. So even the FBI come here for our fraud tourism. In fact, the center that has more money yearly from the CCAP program, that gets more than everyone else, is also owned by the 79th person to be charged in the Feeding Our Future fraud scandal. They got over $3 million in a year of CCAP. And you know fraud is real bad. It's real bad because just after the raids were announced that the federal government and the FBI are getting after fraud in the child care program in Minnesota, Governor Walz immediately took to the internet to highlight his role. And he certainly does have a role. And when the charges come out from these raids, we're going to be floored yet again with the absolute insane amount of fraud in this state. We're at billions of dollars with the Feeding Our Future program. Who knows what we're going to be at with the $500 million in the program, just CCAP alone. So how did it get out of hand here? Well, we've been warned for years by the Office of Legislative Auditor, by whistleblowers, that we have these massive vulnerabilities in our system all the way back in 2018. And little things have been done, which at least something's been done, but these raids just happened. So clearly not enough has been done to deal with this. And in the Children and Families Committee, we heard a lot from the department, and we learned some interesting things. For example, while there is licensing visits every year, they said, well, the licensing visit isn't a program integrity visit. It's not their job to look for fraud. So when they show up to a center that should have 100 kids and there's 3, well, the fraud worksheet that is part of their inspection, the fraud worksheet is optional. It's optional. And, you know, why is it considered going above and beyond the call of duty for an inspector to look for fraud? That's just wrong. So we have this system where fraud is staring us in the face. We've known about it for years, but haven't done enough. Minnesota government programs, we have all sorts of them. The Feeding Our Future stuff, the Promise Act, I mean, it's a all-you-can-steal buffet. And we just keep getting more and more people coming here just to take advantage. So House File 3819 closes these massive vulnerabilities in the program. It reinstates the penalty of perjury when you submit your CCAP attendance records. Because, well, you should be able to attest that your attendance records you're getting paid for are accurate. And that used to be, in 2013, before 2013, we did have that perjury penalty. It also mandates that electronic attendance tracking goes into effect. Now, we're already doing this, but there is no timeline of when this is going to be done. Well, we're starting it in June. And we don't know how long it'll take. They can't give a timeline. And we need that if we are going to root out fraud in this system. It also requires unannounced in-person inspections. So right now, the most likely situation is a licensor notices as a fraud situation when they visit a child care center. They're not required to report it, but that's how it rises to the effect. And in this bill, we also require them to consult the attendance sheets because they're not required to even look at attendance records. And with the real-time attendance tracking, they can now check and verify whether the attendance records match who's in the room, who are the taxpayers paying for. And for centers that get over $500,000 of CCAP every year, $500,000 of taxpayer dollars, they are required to have camera monitoring where the kids sign in at their entrances and exits. Because we need to be able to check that their records reflect what they're getting $500,000 for from the Minnesota taxpayers. Because without monitoring, how are you supposed to know that when they claim they check Johnny in, is that really Johnny? And also, it allows for remote check-in. So the department, if they're suspicious, they can request the data from a center and look, see, does it match? We have the electronic attendance here. Are we seeing that in real life, in real time? Because right now, sure, we can suspect fraud, sure, we can start to investigate it, but it is so hard to actually root it out. House File 3819 is absolutely necessary so that when we spend $500 million on child care, it goes to the people who really need it and to the providers who need it and not to fraudsters. Minnesota taxpayers are tired of being an ATM for fraud. This has to end. So I urge members to vote yes on this urgency motion to take up House File 3819 because while we're discovering fraud with our current system, I guarantee you we're not going to get at all of it. There's going to be so much left, and we owe it to Minnesotans that when we take an enormous amount of tax dollars from them, that we should use it well, use it wisely, and take care of it as if it was our money. Because after all, it's the people of Minnesota's money. And it's an absolute travesty that we've lost billions to fraud in this state. So members, please vote green.
Discussion to the motion. I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Katiza-Watun.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I'm going to ask you guys to vote no against this motion. This bill is not ready for prime time. Fraud in any shape or form is a problem, and we are taking urgent action, and we have been since my co-chair and the Speaker were on the Early Childhood Subcommittee with me in 2019 and 2020. And Chair Pinto was leading us in that committee. We took urgent bipartisan action that session with the Republicans in control in the Senate, and Governor Walz signed those bills into law. The numbers that my co-chair quoted, up to $100 million in child care assistance fraud, are back from almost a decade ago. And members, it's really important that you know that only 6% of that fraud was ever realized, actualized, and convicted. We can talk about big numbers all we want. That doesn't make them real. And we really have to consider that the conversation that we had just a couple weeks ago on the House floor when Representative West brought an urgency for his camera mandate, many of those provisions are packaged into this bill as well. So all of the things that we talked about when we talk about child sexual abuse material are also issues with this bill. I think that there is a valid conversation that we can have about exterior surveillance and how that could assist the department in doing attendance checks and verification. But the language of this bill is not how we would want to go ahead with that. The one thing that I do agree with in this bill is the electronic attendance monitoring. And Co-Chair West did speak to the fact that this is already happening. The department will be rolling out electronic attendance monitoring statewide over the next 6 to, what month is it? It's April, May, but before January 1st. I'm losing track of the days here. We've only got 2 weeks left, right? But I think that when we look at what happened earlier this week with the federal government and some of these child care raids, it is important for Minnesotans to know that ICE was with the FBI on these raids. And what happened in December, what kicked off Operation Metro Surge, was that the president accused Somali child care providers of not taking care of kids, of inventing children, specifically singling out members of our community. And, to the extent that our law enforcement participated in the raids this week, that our departments have cooperated with the feds and given all the information that they have to give, we are doing everything that we can to root out fraud and prevent it before it starts. But this bill, in addition to the problematic provisions within, it also doesn't have a Senate companion, and it's just not ready for prime time. So members, I would ask you to vote against this urgency for so many reasons, including the concerns about child sexual abuse material, the concerns about cost, the fact that it is, it's just not a good bill. So vote red.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Chair West, for bringing this urgency. This is urgent. Our Fraud Prevention Committee did a hearing on child care fraud on Tuesday. If you haven't had time to watch it, you should maybe check it out. These are essential steps to prevent fraud in child care. We used to have the requirement that people would sign under penalty of perjury that their attendance records were accurate. That got taken out, and we need to put it back in because the failure to provide adequate attendance records is driving this fraud. And to the point that was just raised, that the $100 million is not accurate and that only 5 to 6 million was proven. I want to take you back to that situation, and we had great testimony on that in committee this week. So back in sort of the 2017-2019 period, they were doing actual criminal investigations of fraud in DHS, and they had a criminal investigation unit that was conducting searches, conducting surveillance. They got warrants and seized cell phones, computers, and they were building these criminal cases, and 2 of them went to trial, and the people were convicted, and they were just in the the beginning of building all these cases and getting all this evidence. And what happened was the head of the criminal investigation unit wrote, and because there was a lot of press around this, the legislature in 2018 directed the OLA to do a report on CCAP fraud. And that process was going on in the summer and fall of 2018. And the head of the criminal investigation unit wrote a memo outlining all the things they were finding and all the red flags they saw in fraud. And the then Inspector General in DHS tried to stop the head of the criminal investigation unit from sending that email to the OLA. And the head of the criminal investigation unit pointed out rightfully that that is a crime because they are mandated to report to the OLA. And eventually, after a lot of back and forth, the memo was sent to the OLA. And that is where the number 100 million comes from. Because based on their evidence they had found to date, they felt confident that 100 million back then was a safe estimate of the fraud. And the reason the OLA report cited the 5 to 6 million is because that was the amount that had been convicted by the time the report was written. So the OLA was only acknowledging the amount that was found in court. They weren't talking about what was potential fraud in all these other situations. And then when the OLA reports came out in March and April of 2019, they were pretty damning and pretty explicit. And the whole email that the criminal investigation unit director had sent to the OLA was put in the appendix. You can read it right now. It's in the appendix. It starts on page 49. And in that OLA report, they called for a lot of reform in the CCAP program. And they recognized that this was an ongoing problem. And interestingly, then the speaker at that time, according to then OLA Jim Nobles, was forbidding committee chairs in the House of Representatives to hold hearings on the OLA reports. So hearings were never actually held in that point in history on these OLA reports because they were forbidden. So this never really got the light of day. So that summer, rather than seeing this huge problem of CCAP fraud and doubling down on investigations, the Walz administration closed the criminal investigation unit in DHS. And they forbade the criminal investigation unit members from speaking to the BCA without supervisor approval. And they removed the BCA from the Department of Human Services, so they weren't even in the same building. So this is the state of play, members, and it was kind of swept under the rug all these years. They didn't do any more criminal investigations of child care fraud. It all became overpayment fraud. And it all went to a committee to determine if there were, in fact, overpayments, and the committee would decide if they were going to try and recoup the money. Criminal investigations ceased. And that is why we have an urgency, because all these years, this was not being done. And now we need to modernize our child care system. We need to require that the attendance records are true under penalty of perjury, and we need to have this electronic billing moving forward. So thank you, Representative West, for bringing this forward. Members, this is an easy green vote. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Olmsted, Representative Quam.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And even during the time that was referenced where chairs didn't hold hearings, the Legislative Audit Commission did meet, did look over these audits, did look over materials sent by whistleblowers. The stuff we're seeing now is huge, large-scale entities stealing hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. In the early CCAP stuff, it was a lot of small but large scale across, so they'd have apartment buildings where the parents would get together and they would be paid to take care of the neighbor's kids, and the neighbor was being paid to take care of their kids. And the scam was they were just collecting the money and sharing that, as opposed to having it be child care. There was one family where the mother and the grandmother arranged for 8 kids that were being full-time taken care by the mother, and there were indications that was fraud, but there wasn't the investigation, the going after these people. They were predominantly low-income people, but the shift happened during that same period of where there were entities that were doing a little more of the larger scale. And again, it was stated earlier, there were an investigative team, and they were checking into it. And that was happening around the transition between the Dayton and the Walz administrations. We started hearing that from whistleblowers that they were being told, no, you are not reporting, giving, etc. What was worse is when we had audits and there were discrepancies, there were problems, there were issues, we asked the commissioners, was there any disciplinary action, retraining, etc.? And they continued to say no. The knowledge about everything going on was well known because of the quantity of whistleblowers, but they ignored it. It didn't matter. We tried and moved some stuff to try and put things in bills and other items. The next evolution was they would not only not do stuff, when an audit came, they would falsify documentation. Now, it was normal for the auditors to check everything with the agencies, but because of the whistleblowing, because of the conflict between what they're hearing was different than what they were seeing in the documentation, the audit teams actually looked at the documentation in the agencies, and then went and checked the sampling of the people that were being paid, the other entities. And that was how they were able to prove the falsification they were being told about was proven, and it was true. So I do not understand how we as a legislature can sit by when we know for a fact the agencies aren't doing their job. And apparently there's some very interesting stuff on your displays, because you don't seem to understand this progression started years ago, and it's climbed and got worse because we, the legislature, have not passed what is required to be done by the agencies. We abdicated the rulemaking. We abdicated the actual requirements to do their job. And that is what we are not doing now, that we should be doing, is looking at the evidence, looking at the proof in the different audits, taking what the auditor and the whistleblowers have given us and doing the right processes. And frankly, I think the people watching are paying more attention than many of the members on this floor, because this is not trivial. Because every program that we fund and it gets stolen, the people that need the help, the people that are in need, aren't getting it. We talk so much about, oh, this is a wonderful program. We fund it, but we don't care that the agencies don't do the oversight. They don't do the due diligence to make sure the people that actually need that assistance get it. And frankly, this bill would help some, but there's a whole lot more that we should pony up and actually do the work we're elected here to do and ensure that the oversight activities, the implementation, the actual doing the job rules are effective, that they're doing the job. But I'll sit down because apparently it's not important enough to take every single step forward of an opportunity to fix a problem. It's not the dollars, it's the people. We're here to help those people. So let us vote and help those people. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Sensor-Mira.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm listening, Representative Klom. I'm in the conversation. Appreciate those remarks. So I am, thank you, Chair West, for bringing this up. I agree that there's an urgency around childcare. I agree that there is an urgency around affordable childcare. And I agree that anyone that is taking money that's supposed to go to our kids needs to be held responsible. And anything that we can do with our system to make it easier to hold those people responsible, I'm for. I do have some questions, though, about this bill. We've talked a lot in the Children and Families Committee about video monitoring. We've had conversations. Is video monitoring about catching fraud? Is video monitoring about catching abuse? Is it about prosecuting abuse? In this bill, as I understand it, you're specifically trying to tackle the fraud. But I know we've had a lot of conversations around video retention, and I've heard you yourself say having timeline for retention of the video is really important, because this is a closed system, as I'm understanding it. It is not like we have Commissioner Tiki Brown sitting in a room with like 100 computers looking at the entrances to all the different CCAP centers, right? That's not the way it works. So is there in this bill, Chair West, if he would yield to a question, Madam Speaker?
Representative West will yield. Representative Sensor-Mira.
Is there a retention timeline for the videos that we are asking these centers to keep?
Representative West.
Yes, that is something I glossed over here. The retention period in the bill is 90 days, and the department actually had a conversation with us about increasing that because they said 6 months would be ideal for rooting out fraud. However, you know, once you clear 90 days, that cost goes up dramatically. 90 days of data retention is very, very affordable. Once you clear that 90-day threshold, the prices go up dramatically. The centers we're talking about here get $500,000 or more of CCAP money. So that is the thought, that it'd be an affordable measure for them.
Representative Sensor-Mira.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's really not a got you. Chair West, can you actually show me where that is? I'm not seeing that language around retention anywhere in the bill, but maybe I'm not looking at the right version.
Are you asking Representative West to continue to
Yes, sorry,
yield?
if he would yield to another question.
Representative West.
Well, I don't have it right in front of me, so I can't tell you.
Representative Sensor-Mira.
Thank you. I mean, I did a Control F for retention. I did not see it. So I'm concerned about that. And the reason that I'm concerned is you yourself have said that video retention is incredibly important for prosecution. And I would believe that what we'd be trying to do if people are to be held accountable for fraud would be to prosecute them, to hold them accountable. And so we would want to make sure that if this is a closed circuit system, again, it is not like the commissioner is sitting in a room and watching this video as it is happening. I don't think that's the best use of her time. I don't think that's what we want her to be doing. Then we would want to make sure that the video centers are retaining that video so that the department would be able to follow up with them. And what really concerns me about the retention piece is if we go to lines 12.16 to 12.20. So this says the commissioner may request and review recordings or copies of recordings of a licensed provider's operation from certain times and dates. If the licensed provider fails to produce recordings or copies for any of the requested times and dates, the commissioner will use that failure as prima facie evidence that the licensed provider cared for 0 children during the missing times and dates. So I'm really concerned that we are not being clear with this language to providers for how long they should be keeping their video for. And then that to me sounds like at any time if the department comes and says, please produce video from, I don't know, 6 months ago, a year ago, and they are not able to produce it, then we take the lack of that video evidence as evidence that they served 0 children during that time. That feels like a really high bar to me. Can you speak to that, Chair West, if he would yield for a question?
Representative West will yield. Representative West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the reason I said the 90 days is because that was one of the amendments in committee that was adopted when we heard this bill. So that would be the intention, is 90 days. The department, again, wanted more than 90 days. 90 days is affordable, and so that would be the time range in which the commissioner would be requesting said data.
Representative Sensor-Mira.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thanks for that clarification, Chair West. Yeah, I don't think that amendment, made it on there because the bill didn't get out of committee. So that's helpful. I am concerned because I do think that this bill also speaks to the underlying statute, which is 28 days. So I do worry that that could be a little confusing, that the current law says you need to keep it for 28 days. Now we're saying 90 days. I do have a real concern about clarity for the video retention and making sure that we are setting our centers up to be successful. Another question that I have, Chair West, if you would yield to another question, Madam Speaker.
Representative West will continue to yield. Representative Sensor-Mira.
Thank you. So affordability, you spoke to this at the beginning. I think it's a shared value that you and I have. We both have 2 young kids. We both know that childcare is incredibly expensive. How does this bill help with affordability of childcare?
Representative West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, right now, when we suspect people of fraud, it is ridiculously difficult to get those to conviction. And one of the big problems of that is the lack of hard evidence, and that is what this bill resolves. So if we're looking at what I know will be massive numbers, if it wasn't going to be massive numbers from these FBI raids into Minnesota on these child care centers, if it wasn't going to be an absolutely staggering amount, I am sure Governor Walz's statement would have been more like, oh, federal government bad, don't listen to him. But instead it was, we're working hard to root this out, because this problem is substantial, and that is why it has attracted so much investigation. And when taxpayers see how many of their dollars are going to fraud, they're going to be mad, and justifiably so. And then we can recover those dollars and have them go to the families and providers that need them, which will result in more affordable care for everyone.
Representative Sensor-Mira.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, I did not hear you, Chair West, speak to the cost of the cameras, which is something that we have heard child care providers come again and again and talk to us about. I know that you've heard the concerns from our side of the aisle that maybe you can do camera systems on the cheap, but when we are trying to keep our kids safe, when we are worried about who can get that material, we're looking at incredibly expensive systems. So if we already are one of the most expensive states for childcare, if we already have families that are paying more than $20,000 for childcare, we're asking them to install these camera systems. It will either be the state paying for those systems or our centers paying for the systems. And we have heard from centers that this is the needle that will break the camel's back, that if we ask them to have one more cost, like putting in these cameras, that they will literally go out of business. That is what the child care centers have told us. But I do wanna, you said something about investigations, and the last question I have for you, Chair West, is around that. Will he yield to one more question?
Representative West will yield. Representative Sensormura.
Thank you, Chair West. Did your caucus give Nick Shirley the list of the child care centers?
Representative West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. No. But what we do know is that there were 20-some raids in the Minnesota child care centers. There's been numerous child fraud scandals in Minnesota to the tune of billions of dollars. We have 80-plus people who have been charged and many convicted on the Feeding Our Future scandal, and that's $250 million right there. We're looking at a very, very frightening amount of fraud in our state. And if we aren't going to do anything, if we're just going to sit here and let the fraudsters fleece the taxpayer, that just doesn't sound right. So if you have over $500,000 a year of tax dollars, you probably already have cameras, but if you don't, well, we actually do have a technology fund to help you pay for it, and it is affordable. So it blows my mind that we wouldn't do anything to deal with the billions of dollars of fraud, and it seems like that number is only going to get larger. And that is something that taxpayers are sick of, and we need the money that goes to people who need the assistance should get to the people who needs assistance. That's something that everybody in this room agrees to, and this bill will help that happen.
Representative Sensormura.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So what I heard you say, Chair West, after some kind of fumbling was that no, your caucus did not. I believe that that is actually in direct contradictions to statements I read from Madam Speaker, that actually it was your caucus that gave them that list. So it seems like one person in your caucus right now is not telling the truth about their actions. And I'll say why I'm pressing on this. Because people in my community have the lived experience of your caucus giving a 19-year-old right-wing YouTuber a list of businesses in our community that sent our president on a mission to terrorize our kids. That is why it matters that someone in your caucus is not telling the truth about how that started and the GOP House caucus's direct involvement in that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize a member from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So members, let's just sort of stop and review where we are. So the motion is to declare an urgency to pass this bill 3819 relating to purportedly addressing fraud in CCAP. Is fraud an urgent problem? It absolutely is. I'll note that the fraud has been said by several of my colleagues that fraud, when it comes to childcare, of course, is depriving kids from opportunities to learn and parents from opportunities to work. So that's incredibly concerning. Having said that, this particular proposal was heard in a committee. There was not agreement in that committee, didn't advance at that point. It lacks a Senate companion. Maybe I will ask Chair West, if I can, if he'll yield, Madam Speaker, a question.
Representative West will yield. Representative Pinto.
So, Chair West, this bill was introduced on March 2nd. You say that it's very urgent that it pass. It has no Senate companion. Is that because you have not tried to find a senator to introduce a bill, or the senators have all refused you? Which one?
Representative West.
We need to move this bill forward, and it would be a travesty of the Senate not to move on this bill. And there is time to move on the bill, so let's take the step to address this ridiculous problem, billions of dollars in fraud. It's just something that we shouldn't let go on. And sure, things have been done to nibble around the edges, but clearly we haven't done enough, and it would be a shame to leave this legislative session without doing anything about it.
Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, Chair West, your actions speak louder than your words, sir, because this bill was introduced on March 2nd. So either you weren't trying or the senators have all turned you down. A document's been distributed on the floor that says Summary of Minnesota Legislative Changes to Support Program Integrity. These are the changes to the CCAP program since 2018. It's interesting. So this topic seems to be sort of a greatest hits thing. There was an OLA report from 7 years ago, and somehow we keep on going back to it. I've heard a number from that CCAP report of $100 million. A reminder, the report said there was not evidence of that number. Now, am I saying that it's not very important we go after fraud in any of our programs, including CCAP? I'm certainly not. But it's just interesting. We keep on going back 7 years. Members, in the ensuing years, this 4-page document, quite dense, shows all the various changes that have been made. Many of those changes had bipartisan support. Obviously, in 2019 and 2020, 2021, there was a GOP Senate. We're working together. In 2025, we know that last session there were a number of changes made as well, quite a lot in 23, 24. And yet somehow we keep on jumping back 7 years. I'm going to jump back 2 days to, as Chair Robbins noted, there was a fraud committee hearing on child care. I was present for that hearing. I heard the chair say just now that this is essential. This is so essential, apparently, that nothing in this bill came up 2 days ago. Now, a reminder, the Fraud Prevention Committee does not actually hear bills to prevent fraud. We've passed one bill, acted officially on one bill. But even setting that aside, members, an entire hearing about child care and something so incredibly essential that we have to move it through, no Senate companion, blocked in the chamber, and yet somehow nothing in this bill came up 2 days ago. Nothing, nothing, nothing. What did come up was the assertion that criminal investigations have ceased for child care. Completely not true. As untrue as various assertions made in the Nick Shirley video. Members, it's true that the criminal unit within DHS at the time has now been moved to the BCA, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. What do? They apprehend criminals, including those that have committed fraud. Criminal investigations absolutely have continued. The statement was made during the committee meeting 2 days ago that somehow criminal investigations ceased. Nope, 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 nope. That was corrected. In fact, the folks from Department of Children, Youth, and Families who oversee this program were asked, wouldn't it be helpful to have criminal investigators in your agency? They explained why that would not be helpful. Now, one thing they were not asked was, would it be helpful to have one of the provisions of 3819? Would that be helpful? Would that be harmful? What's your opinion about that? Not asked about that. Not asked about video recordings. It's essential that this thing pass, and yet somehow it just doesn't end up coming up. Members, we as a body have taken quite a lot of action relating to child care over the past number of years. It's unfortunate that when we have somebody come from out of state and go to various individual child care providers, bang on the door and say, I want to see children, and then there's not a response there, then somehow that resurrects this thing from 7 years ago. Members, there's a lot of important work to be done. I am grateful to the various committees and the co-chairs in those various committees who have done a lot of great work to address fraud in various programs. I'm looking at you, the Human Services Committee, the Health Committee. It's unfortunate that in the Children and Families Committee, it sounds like there's not been agreement to move a number of non-controversial provisions out. Members, this is a bill, 3819, that didn't have the support in that committee, didn't have the support in the Fraud Committee, if you can thought about it at all. There was apparently no urgency to try to move this in the Senate. Members, let's actually move things that will address fraud. I'm not on the Children and Families Committee. I can't address the content of this bill. I think Chair Katiza-Wattoon, Representative Sensamura did very well. I'm just letting the actions speak louder than the words. And members, the actions would say, this is not a thing that's essential, But many of the other steps we're taking to address fraud, thank goodness we are doing that. It's critical that we do. Let's get back to that work, but reject this motion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I recognize a member from Hennepin, Representative Robbins.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to jump up and address a little bit of what was just said. I wish I had time to print out this article from Jim Noble's, the OLA at the time of those reports, but he submitted an op-ed on October 22nd, 2025 in the Star Tribune that I recommend to everyone to read. And basically, if I can find it, he said, he said state officials, particularly in the Department of Human Services, but in other departments as well, allowed community organizations to administer important programs without first verifying they were trustworthy. Then they failed to verify claims from these organizations that were serving hundreds, even thousands of people in their communities. And then he goes on to talk about his reports. That is still going on. We had the example of many of these things in the committee on Tuesday. And to address Chair Pinto's point, we're an oversight committee. We are not a legislative committee that hears a lot of bills. That's not the design of an oversight committee. This is the first time the legislature has had an oversight committee, so people kind of misunderstand the role sometimes. But our job is to expose and take a broad look at what's going on across agencies and provide oversight. And that's why we have these hearings, so that we can expose things and then work on, in a bipartisan fashion, which we have done on many occasions, ways to strengthen internal controls when we have found areas where there are gaps. And we continue to find these areas of gaps. We continue to work in bipartisan ways to bring bills to the floor that usually don't even go through our committee. They go through State Gov or other committees that then address the gaps we have exposed. A good example is the OIG bill, which I think is moving, and I hope we get that across the finish line this session. We're also trying to get an extension to the statute of limitations. I did a whole hearing a couple weeks ago on the governor's fraud proposals. So we are taking a look at all these proposals. Last year we got good bipartisan work done, expanding whistleblower protections, requiring more oversight in different DHS programs. So the work that we do in oversight leads to good legislation, and I'm very thankful for that partnership with the policy committees. But what really happened in 2017 is that the Criminal Investigation Unit was shut down, and they were not allowed to talk to the BCA without supervisor approval. And the people who ran the Criminal Investigation Unit were not transferred to the BCA. They either resigned or were let go or were reassigned. They weren't transferred over to continue their criminal investigations. They were not allowed to continue their criminal investigations. So we have to be very clear about what happened. The BCA does conduct criminal investigations right now. They gave us a chart in committee, and I wish I would have known we were having this debate, because I would have brought all my materials from committee. But there was a chart that was provided to us by DCYF where they showed how the criminal investigations have fallen off since this unit was closed. There have been 2 convictions. 2 convictions since that happened, and they had 15 active cases. So members, we are not getting the criminal investigations done. And this is a huge problem. And so this bill does take up some of the basic things that need to be done. I'm glad that they addressed electronic attendance records last time. We need to do that in more areas. I had a whistleblower literally call me today talking about how we need to do that in adult day services. So I hope that the Health and Human Services Committees will take that up next year. We need to have these electronic attendance records. We had a hearing on non-emergency medical transportation. We're trying to get a bill passed this session that would improve internal controls by having GPS tracking so that we know that these transportation companies are actually doing the routes they say they're doing. This is just one example of one of the many vectors of fraud that we have a responsibility to address to stop taxpayer money from being spent by criminals, by being stolen by criminals. And if we drop the ball on the criminal side, there's no deterrent. We had testimony to that this week. When they stopped doing criminal investigations, the deterrent stopped. And what happens is they get sanctioned for overpayments, and a new group pops up, and it's often someone related or in a business relationship already, and they just open a new group at the same location under the same name. And that happens all the time. The Feeding Our Future group called Future Early Learning Childcare, they closed on October 1st, and it opened the next day under a new name. Like, that is happening in real time in Minnesota right now. And I think, I can't believe we're not at the point where we're willing to take this seriously after all the hearings and all the attention, but this is our responsibility to safeguard taxpayer dollars and make sure Minnesotans in need of these services can have them. And so I hope we will take that seriously and pass this bill. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative West.
Thank you for the lovely debate on this motion, members. So Minnesotans are done giving the benefit of the doubt. Honestly, I think the idea was, oh, we did some things. Oh, okay, this is going to be taken care of. Clearly, it's not taken care of. They expect us to do something. And the idea that we're only, getting at 6% of this, that's exactly why we need this bill. The loopholes are enormous. The job of investigators is insurmountable almost. The fact that we're relying on the federal government to do the work for us, to prosecute the fraud, that's only going to work after the money's left our state and is traveling overseas and we can get the federal government involved for international wire transfers and the like. So we need this bill, or else we will just see this fraud continue and they'll get away with it. So members, please support the motion.
I recognize the member from Dakota, Representative Hanson Jay.
Thank you, Speaker. Folks, I think we all are in agreement that the misuse of taxpayer dollars is entirely unacceptable in any way, shape, or form, right? I don't think anybody disagrees on that, and I want that to be really clear. It's absolutely deserving of our continued and utmost attention and action. But I really warn you to fall for the fallacy that this bill does that. This bill has not been done in collaborative work, and I go back to the comments I've made here a bunch of times about doing the work. It does not mean that we cut corners on policies that impact children in Minnesota. The topic of cybersecurity has been discussed about this bill and others like it many times. The maker of the motion has been asked to incorporate cybersecurity measures and guardrails several times last year and several more times this year. And despite a commitment to do so last year in the current statute that requires cameras at centers with maltreatment reports, nothing happened. That still has not happened today. And cybersecurity matters in situations like this, and especially in policies that have little to no precedence anywhere else on the planet when monitoring and putting surveillance on kids like this. We just passed my bill the other day to ban the use of notification technology in AI. All of us, most of us, almost all of us, passed that bill. And we all spoke about how important that was. And while I was listening to that, there were some contradictory statements that had come up in committee about this very topic when I raised these concerns in committee about this proposal. And again, it's not about anybody disagreeing on whether or not it is important and our responsibility to address the misuse of taxpayer dollars every time we can. But just because we voted to ban this technology in Minnesota does not make that apply in any other state or any other country on the planet. The EU is working on this, but we did better than the EU by getting this policy in place. And so for all of you who voted for that because you agreed that that was something we should care about, you should know this. The footage of infants and toddlers is the most sought after material by these disgusting predators that make this material, that makes AI generated CSAM. Infants and toddlers, they can't get their hands on the same kind of content to feed into the models to make it real enough for these pedophiles to be satiated. I do not think that we should put up a flag to the world and say, look at what we have, a panacea of databases that are on closed circuit cameras with no other cybersecurity measures, and say, let's just put that out there and leave it as is. That feels entirely irresponsible to me. So if you voted to support the bill the other day on the premise that the 26,000% increase in the AI-generated child sexual abuse material was problematic and you wanted to do something about it, I'm so proud of us for doing that. We should be so proud of us for doing that. Then this is a similar situation where we need to think thoroughly and critically before we jump to do this. The current mandate we have on the centers that goes into effect this summer, centers with maltreatment reports, has no cybersecurity measures. Closed circuit TVs, closed circuit cameras is not cybersecurity. And you should not be fooled to think that it is. I will never, and neither should you, ever sign your name to a vote that will put our children, Minnesota infants and toddlers and kiddos going to daycare, as the potential subjects of the first of its kind on the planet, panacea of footage and collateral, to become the subjects of AI-generated CSAM conducted in other states for the next century or more. Protect our kids from this. We agreed that this is a threat to children, and we have to think thoroughly about this. Had we seen different cybersecurity measures be intentionally, meaningfully, and thoroughly vetted with the experts I brought to the committee to do this, if we had seen those efforts, if we had seen that in this bill or even in a subsequent one introduced, I wouldn't be having this conversation with you today. But I raised the alarm about the feature that we banned the other day, and I'm raising the alarm again here. We cannot think that the actions we took will prevent our kids from becoming the subjects of that if just because other states and countries haven't banned that technology. It's still going to exist everywhere. We are just leading the way on that. So please, please do not make a decision that is going to put us in this situation. Please vote against this motion. Thank you.
I recognize a member from Anoka, Representative Niska.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. For years, House Republicans have stood in this chamber and warned that Minnesota Child Care Assistance Program was vulnerable to fraud. And for years, we got the same response, a similar response to what we've heard today, dismissing warnings, at times even laughing at or mocking those concerns. We've been told that the system is working, that our concerns are overblown, and Representative Robbins, thank you for mentioning that op-ed from Jim Nobles of October from last year, because he said some pretty interesting stuff about the problem with this body as it relates to efforts to minimize the fraud. And we heard, just like the efforts we heard tonight, Mr. Noble said that when he issued that report, quote, some key legislators tried to minimize the fraud problem and shield the Department of Human Services and the Walz administration from criticism. I noticed particularly significantly for this debate, as actions speak louder than words, he said, quote, the chief House supporter of publicly funded child care subsidies criticized the OLA report for referencing prosecutions that had proven fraud in the child care program. The references were unnecessary and harmful, he said. Well, members, we have seen the same story over and over and over again in Minnesota's multi-billion-dollar fraud crisis that has put our state on the map for all the wrong reasons. Weak safeguards, delayed action, millions of taxpayer dollars lost, and CCAP is a huge part of the problem. And we saw it just this week, how urgent this is. Federal law enforcement executed search warrants at 22 locations across the Twin Cities, many tied to child care fraud. And we heard even efforts to kind of pretend like, oh, that was bad. ICE maybe was involved in that, at the same time as the governor pretended like he was actually responsible for helping it happen. Of course, the director of the FBI debunked that, but it'd be nice if Democrats could at least keep their story straight. The reality is, the 9 centers that were just rated accounted for about $14 million in CCAP just in fiscal year 2025. How many kids could that have been used to help with childcare? Childcare is expensive because Minnesotans are paying a fraud tax, and that fraud tax is the result of years of inaction from Democrat administrations and minimization from Democrat legislators covering for those Democrat administrations. So the federal government has had to come in to clean up the mess that was left behind. I heard from someone in the fraud committee on the other side of the aisle talking about what happened in that fraud committee. He didn't happen to mention the shocking thing that we learned in that fraud committee. Not that shocking if you're paying attention, but still confirming what we've heard from the U.S. Attorney. A former manager in the Office of Inspector General at DHS testified that individuals involved in the child care scams told investigators that they first heard about Minnesota and the opportunities to defraud Minnesota in refugee camps in Kenya. Just like the U.S. Attorney a few months ago, in announcing some more prosecutions, said, we have people coming from Pennsylvania to Minnesota, fraud tourism in the state of Minnesota, because they know that we're such an easy mark. That's the reputation that Minnesota has, not just across the country, but across the world. And the consequences of that are real. They're real for the families that have to pay that fraud tax. They're real for the legitimate providers who are forced to compete against bad actors, leering centers, and other bad actors. And you can complain about a 19-year-old using publicly available information and exposing that to the world. The reality is, our state regulators should have been cracking down on that long ago. And our state regulators should have known the facts when they pretended to debunk some of the facts in those videos, and it turned out that they were not telling the truth themselves. They were taking the lies of the Leering Center proprietors and just saying that was the truth. And they admitted just the same in the fraud committee hearing that we've discussed. So members, we have to keep in mind what's really important here. The people paying the price for the fraud aren't the fraudsters. They're the families who need child care, who have to pay a fraud tax. They're the honest providers trying to compete on an uneven playing field. And this bill is a chance to start fixing it, to restore trust, to send a clear message that Minnesota will no longer be an easy target to fraud. As we heard today, actions speak louder than words. Actions speak louder than words. A green vote says you're serious about solving this problem. A red vote says you're not. Members, vote green.
The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members participating remotely.
Green.
Go ahead, Judy.
Green votes no.
Green votes no. McDonald. McDonald.
McDonald, aye.
McDonald votes aye. Momani Hildsley.
Momani Hildsley, no.
Momani Hildsley votes no. Perez Vega.
Perez Vega, no.
Perez Vega votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 63 ayes and 67 nays, the motion to suspend does not prevail.